Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to wait a few more moments here to allow everyone to fully enter the room and connect, and then we'll get started. All right, it looks like we have everyone out of the waiting room at least. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our welcoming remarks this morning. Good morning. It's August 28th, 2024. I'm Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, 25517, the unassigned portion 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. Welcome. This will be our normal routine in terms of the Zoom room. So welcome to the Zoom room. The hearing today is being conducted entirely by Zoom teleconference. So none of us are appearing in person today. This hearing is also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. If you are not planning to speak today, please use the YouTube channel for viewing the hearing rather than logging into the Zoom platform. That helps me so I don't need to scroll through so many pages today. The audio and video of the hearing are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording in the FTP folder for the proceeding, typically by the next morning. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. I expect that we may be joined by some of the State Water Board members today on the Zoom platform. Our team will be pinning those members as they join us, so you will know which members are with us in the teleconference room. If at any time you're experiencing technical difficulties today trying to communicate with us or with the Zoom platform, please send an email to the site's email inbox or to the AHO inbox. The AHO team is monitoring that inbox and they can let me know that there is a problem. If for any reason today I am have a connectivity problem and I'm not in the room and I'm not able to rejoin you within a short period of time, a member of the AHO staff will call a brief recess until we can work out any of those issues. As has been our, well, as will be our practice, we will take breaks. Please, to the witnesses, if you need a break, don't hesitate to ask. I know the witnesses are generally the ones on the hot seat, so to speak. We will take a mid-morning break, a lunch break of about an hour, and then an afternoon break. I will hold us to a hard stop once again at 5 p.m. So we can all reach our other commitments. Ms. Mullen will again be assisting us with exhibits. So if you are a witness today or an attorney, you can ask Ms. Mullen directly to please bring up a particular exhibit and she can do that. With that orientation, I am going to forego taking appearances today. We'll carry those over from yesterday. We also have the advantage of all being in the Zoom room, so it's more clear who is here with us. I wanted to start a brief agenda. I thought we would start with some housekeeping issues and procedural issues. And then my understanding is we were going to pick up if there is any recross questions for our two witnesses who are also on panel 2. We will pick up with those this morning. And then once we have completed with panel 1, we will move over to the Sites Project Authority panel 2 witnesses. Before I move to the first thing I wanted to talk about on housekeeping, actually the only thing I wanted to talk about on housekeeping this morning is time limits. I wanted to address those. But before I move to time limits, I thank you to those who submitted suggestions. I saw the suggestion from the authority and the other emails related to the site visit. I just haven't had a time to process those. I'll look at those on the more detail on the break or over lunch, and then we'll get back to that. But are there any other, before we turn to time limits, are there any other procedural issues that we should address this morning? Mr. King, you are on mute, so I can't hear you or see you.
Yes, let me get my video going. Sorry.
No problem.
So I apologize, but I have here we go. I have a conflicting engagement at noon today, and I'm not sure when you will be coming up for cross, but if it possible, if you could work around that engagement, it should just be during the lunch hour. So at noon.
Yes, Mr. King, it starts at noon, and then do you have a sense of when you would be able to join
It
us?
shouldn't be beyond the lunch hour, so I should be back
Okay.
by 1
We can
or
certainly
whenever.
accommodate that. No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.
And then the other is that, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, but if you remember, I tried to introduce my King Exhibit 64, which was the worksheet spelling out the financing costs for the project, which I believe is very important for the public benefit analysis. Um, Mr. Robinette did not remember having a familiarity with it, and I couldn't provide the context to bring that in. I've submitted two extra exhibits today called King 73 and King 74, which are emails from or to Mr. Robinette in November of 2023, with discussions with Mr. Urkoff with a link to that exhibit. And so I don't know when that's appropriate, but I believe that if I had a chance to follow up today, I could prove that he actually had knowledge of this worksheet, which spells out the capital cost of 18,700 per acre, but it's really important for the public benefit analysis, especially for the public benefit analysis in the for the WISIP application.
Let me think, Mr. King, about how to handle this. It's as you've grasped, I think, from so far, the way water rights proceedings are typically run at the State Water Board is we submit everything in advance so that we don't have these types of issues come up on the fly, right? All the evidence comes in advance. Now, you didn't know that Mr. Robinette wouldn't recognize a spreadsheet, and now you want to demonstrate that he ought to recognize the spreadsheet.
Correct. Yeah.
So I understand that. So let me think about how we want to handle this. One of the thoughts that I have is this may be more appropriate to come in on rebuttal. This is not our only, this is by no means our only time going through these issues. Um, the other issue here, let me finish my
Yes.
thought that I'm thinking
sorry.
about is the public benefit analysis. That is not explicitly part of our proceeding here. We do have a public interest factor that is a hearing issue. So the other thing here is I'm trying to connect. It's not, the State Water Board isn't going to be making a determination or revisiting the Water Commission's public benefit analysis. That's what the Water Commission does. But the State Water Board does have a public interest analysis, and to some extent, economic considerations out related to the project may be relevant to that. So there's a relevance question I have here as well. That said, let me take a look at what you've submitted, and I understand your arguments here today. And we will give a chance, certainly the authority, I imagine, will want to respond to this. So let's let them take a look at what you submitted, and but don't hesitate to remind me that we need to revisit this issue.
Well, thank you very much. And part of part of my proving my case is really through cross. I didn't anticipate. I don't think I have capability really to do the role case in chief of full. And so I am good at understanding issues and trying to look at the documents. And so that's one reason I'm using this time now in cross. But thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. King. Are there other issues we should address before I turn to time? All right.
Ms.
Yeah.
Kinsey, Chris
Yes,
Schutz.
I don't. Oh, Mr. Schutz. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a follow-up yesterday from the cross-examination of Mr. Brown. He referred me to the value planning document in regards to the unit cost of both what was not affordable and what was affordable. I reviewed the value planning document last night. There is limited reference to unit costs in there and limited reference to anything that's stated in dollars per acre foot. There's some material related to dollars per acre foot in terms of loan repayments, but not that I could see in overall cost. And as I stated yesterday, I would request that that the authority produce some kind of dollar figure to support Mr. Brown's generalization of affordability. And I'm going to repeat that request now, because I don't see it there unless he can provide a secondary or third reference. And I'd be happy to wait for the authority to provide that. But having to do the treasure hunt through the voluminous documents that the authority has submitted, I don't think is appropriate and in support of a generalization that I think is important in Mr. Brown's testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. I think this issue sounds to me, one, I think it merits a conversation between you and counsel for the authority. It sounds like something that maybe can be worked out there. To the extent you continue, because I'm not in a position to direct, unless it's I don't think I'm prepared at this time to direct the authority to submit evidence they haven't already submitted, especially since we're in case in chief. We haven't gotten to rebuttal. So we're building the record at this point. The other piece of this that I want to mention, Mr. Schutz, is if you have additional questions for the witnesses, and this is probably also relevant to you, Mr. King, and others, if you have additional questions for the witnesses because of statements made on cross-examination, that to me sounds like it comes in on rebuttal. You can call these, we can see these witnesses again. So that is something also to consider, that I think additional questions that are coming out of testimony on cross-examination may be appropriate for rebuttal to the extent it's a response to the case in chief put on by the authority. I will let you have that conversation though with the authorities counsel. I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Hearing Officer Kinsey, could I respond?
Yes, Mr. Hitchings, please.
Yes, Andrew Hitchings. Good morning. Yeah, I agree that this would be something if Mr. Schutz and CSPA have an issue with regard to whether the project is affordable or not. It's not up to the authority to put more evidence in the record at this point. If they dispute the affordability, then they should have addressed that on cross and have been prepared to do that, or otherwise address it on rebuttal. So it's not really our obligation to respond to a request for additional information at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Mr. King.
Yes, so can you just tell me when rebuttal might be in the proceedings? How does that work?
We haven't decided yet, which is why it's not in it's somewhat confusingly is not currently in the schedule.
Okay.
One of the issues we need to talk about is when rebuttal is going to be.
Okay, so after everybody presents their case.
It will be after cases in chief, and it will be some period of time after case in chief. Here's how generally this will play out. We will hear cases in chief. We will finish those up hopefully mid-October, October 10th, ideally. And then there will be a period of time, at least some number of weeks, if not more, for you and all of the parties to assemble your rebuttal exhibits. And those will be submitted in advance in the same way that case in chief exhibits were submitted in advance. And then there will be a time period for all of you to review those exhibits as we did with case in chief. And then we will schedule those rebuttal hearing days. So I think it's fair for me to indicate, I think when I did the math, it doesn't look to me like we'll get to rebuttal hearing days until 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schutz, let me go back to you because I didn't mean to cut you off on this topic.
That was fine. You didn't cut me off. I'd just like to respond briefly to Mr. Hitchings. I did ask on cross-examination for the information and for a citation in support of Mr. Brown's testimony. At this point, I'll have to decide how to address this issue, but I just want it clear that I understand that cross-examination is an appropriate venue for this kind of discussion. That's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busher.
One quick question, and I apologize if I missed it when you said it earlier. Is there a court reporter today?
Is there a court reporter today? It's not the State Water Board court reporter, so which is why I'm not, Mr. Hitchings, can you respond to that?
Yes, I believe that Ms. Cott her name is on the screen and it says reporter in parentheticals after her name.
Indeed. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Mr.
you. I see
Hitchings.
that now.
Yes. She was on my page.
So, sorry.
It's no problem. All right, I'm going to, if you have other things that come up while we talk about time limits, I will entertain those after we talk about time limits. But I did want to talk about time. I do think I entirely agree that we should break out the protestants' time. I have no intent of changing the authorities' allocated time, so that will stand as is, at 40 hours, I believe it was. I had some questions for you, Mr. Busher. I read the NGO's email requesting additional time, and I want to make sure I understand here because I think your math and my math are different. So I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page and I'm not thinking about this incorrectly. I believe first you mentioned that Sites Authority has identified 29 witnesses across 10 panels. I count 24. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I think some of the witnesses are appearing more than once, which maybe is the difference. But I believe there are 24 witnesses by the authority. Mr. Hitchings, does that sound right?
Yes, that is correct.
So there may be 24 individual people. I, for example, counted Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni, right, once yesterday and again today as separate witnesses because it's separate testimony and separate cross-examination.
And I'm sorry.
I thought that was 29, but.
And now maybe my math is wrong. I just look back at my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, 24. Okay.
So there are 3 panels with 5 witnesses, panels 1, 3, and 6. So that's 15. There are then 7 panels with 2 witnesses. So that's 14. So I count 29.
29. Except that some witnesses appear more than once.
Correct. But right, our examination of Ms. Forsyth yesterday is separate from our examination of Ms. Forsyth today.
And then the NGO party submitted testimony from 19 expert witnesses, but I believe we're only going to hear from 17 based on my procedural ruling. Does that also fit your understanding?
And at least one of them will appear twice. The NGO witnesses.
Okay.
About separate topics.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I think I recall that. But here's the thing, as I counted, 24 witnesses plus 17 is 36 witnesses, which is a lot different than 48 witnesses. And I understand some will appear on multiple panels, but I just wanted to make sure I have not forgotten about anyone.
So I mean, I think it is 29 plus either 17 or 19.
Okay.
And 29 and right, that's 46 or 48 witnesses. I don't know. I'm nervous doing math on the fly here, but.
Sure, fair enough. Mr. Reese, I see your hand is up. Are you going to help me help us on this?
I
realize
I wish I could. I wish I
additionally-
could. I don't trust my math either. But no, I just want to flag something before I forget it for a different minor procedural issue, which is on September 23rd and 24th. I failed to mention yesterday that two of our key witnesses, Mr. Burke and Mr. Wilson, have to attend or need to attend some modeling symposium in Sacramento. It's an all-day thing or a 2-day thing, and there may be other people involved in this proceeding that would go as well. So I need to be able to work around that. I just wanted to flag that before I forgot it.
Thank you, Mr. Reese, and I appreciate for all of you if you're able to coordinate amongst yourselves. I certainly that's helpful, and we will accommodate that. So thank you, Mr. Reese. All right. I think that those are my questions. look back here on my notes. I'm sorry, Mr. Busher, did you have more you'd like to add?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add there, right, for the witnesses that we've identified, right, we set aside 20 minutes for direct. Some will be shorter than that, and a half an hour for redirect. Some will be shorter than that, but we need to make sure that we have enough time reserved to do an adequate redirect for our witnesses. And so even if that's a slight overestimate, right, it would be hugely prejudicial to come to the end of our witnesses and not be able to do redirect because of the timing. And so for those 17 or 19 witnesses, we had set aside a little bit less than 50 minutes for each one of them in building our estimate.
Understood. Thank you. And then, Mr. King, I have a question for you, looking at your request for 8 hours, I believe.
Yes.
I noticed that let's see, I think backing up, we had this discussion that in these proceedings, testimony is submitted in writing in advance. In this case, it was July 15th, and you submitted written testimony. But I note, and I actually reread it last night, and it took me about, I think if you were to read it out loud into the record, which
Yeah.
should not do, it's maybe less than 10 minutes. But you asked for an hour to present your case in chief. And I just wanted some clarity from you about the reason for that estimate, because that seems to conflict with your relatively short written testimony.
Well, I thought my testimony was longer than that. Because I thought it was too long. That was my concern. So I'm not sure if it's the same testimony we're referencing. Or maybe I made a mistake, but I can revisit that. But so my intention is to make sure that I have asserted, my water rights, the riparian rights, and the appropriative rights, and talk about the priority dates and why I wasn't subordinated. But also the other part is that we have a deed, which we believe gives us with the county of Colusa and RD 2047, which gives us basically property rights that may be subject to unconstitutional taking. And so those are the property right issues. But besides that, I really focusing on water quality issues and public trust issues that have to do with maintaining flows that go through and on our property, and a variety of issues that tie to public trust. So my intent in my expert witness was to continue to just do whatever I need to do to assert my property right interest, but really focus more on public trust issues and environmental issues regarding the future viability and sustainability of the property next to my.
So, Mr. King, I'm doing this in advance because I'm foreseeing that I don't want to get to the point where we're bringing you up to give your testimony and then there's an objection. I'd like to deal with this a little bit in advance. So I'm going to probe on this and take the time. You don't mention riparian water rights in your testimony, at least the testimony I'm looking at. So if you may want to, maybe the thing to do is revisit and make sure King 68, which I understand is your written testimony on case in chief. Maybe revisit that and make sure you submitted the correct, what you intended to submit, because when I do a word search of it, and I noticed it when I reread it, there is no reference to riparian water rights.
I intended to do that on cross yesterday, and I can do that today. We've asserted riparian rights.
Mr. King, this may be a rebuttal issue. Cross-examination is not the place to make your case in chief.
Okay.
Be in your case in chief, and now we're in this. So I'm trying to figure out how to handle this, but I think maybe rebuttal may be the place for this, where it'll give you an opportunity to submit those documents and the testimony that you, I think, intended to bring in the case in chief. And I want a fair chance to do that. The problem is the deadline of July 15th was the deadline to submit written testimony. I want to make sure the authority has a fair opportunity to review your testimony. I mean, it's in the same way that we all are, the same rules apply. So I just wanted to if you have additional requests about the process, but I wanted to flag this early, we'll figure out how to work this out in a manner that's fair. But I wanted to flag for you that your opportunity to present testimony for the case of chief, when we get to that point, which will be a couple of weeks, I imagine, you will be held to the bounds of your written testimony that you submitted on July 15th. And that is the outer scope. So if you go beyond that, the authority may raise an objection, and I will likely sustain that because you're limited by those bounds. And that was laid out in our hearing notice. That's how we run these proceedings. The idea is the written testimony comes in, everyone sees it. We avoid this on the fly kind of, it avoids surprises during the hearing itself. And then the hearing is, and this is to all of the parties, as you've gathered, the hearing really is about cross-examination. It's our opportunity to do that. And the summaries of direct testimony are mostly to orient the listeners to what was really important in the testimony and what we're highlighting. So,
well, thank you. Just to be clear, you're suggesting that on the rebuttal, it's basically do what I would, basically try to do what I was tending to do as far as like the documents that prove my riparian rights in the rebuttal part, and that'd be a written submission. Is that right? Is that what you're telling me?
I think that would be the appropriate place if you have, because the case in chief portion of the, I can't give you legal advice, so I'm trying to walk through this line, but the case in chief portion is the opportunity for parties to present their case in chief relevant to the hearing issues. I believe the authority has presented case in chief evidence relevant to asserting that the grant of this water rate permit would not injure other valid water rate users. And then in rebuttal, it may be appropriate to respond to the evidence and testimony submitted by the authority on that point.
For example, today in the testimony of Ms. Bizzoni, on the water availability analysis, one of the questions I was going to ask about her consideration of riparian rights downstream. So I get what you're saying is I can't go and try to make a case to prove our water rights, but I could probably ask the question about her analysis of riparian rights downstream. Is that?
You can ask about her analysis. I don't want to cut you off in your line of questioning without having heard it. I mean,
okay. Well, I really don't. Obviously I'm engaged in this, but I expected to have more of a standard hearing, and so, but I understand that I've kind of made some decisions I have to live with, and that's fine. I appreciate that. So, please, if I'll get more precise or better as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. So with that, with those, and those were, thank you for the discussions from both of you on this. Let me look back at my notes here. What I'd like to do is rule orally on the time limits so that you all are aware and you can plan accordingly. That said, as I indicated before, these time limits are subject to my discretion. If you need to exceed those limits, you make depending on what it is, an offer of proof or a good cause showing as to why additional time is appropriate. Of course, there's flexibility. I understand the pace of the hearing and the number of objections may matter, all those things. So you'll come to me with those. I think, as I mentioned, the authority's time will remain the same, which I believe was, let me look at this. $40 hours for the authority, also remaining the same as Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Water Resources, and state water contractors, 6 hours. So my intent only is to break out the protesting parties. Mr. Hitchings, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, hearing officer. I'd like to know if we could be heard before you make your oral ruling, because we've just been waiting for you to clarify the time.
I didn't give you the chance. Yes, please go, Mr. Hitchings. You're welcome to.
Yeah, if ultimately there is intended to be any increase over the 46 hours that was in the procedural ruling as the proposed time limit for the protestants collectively, the authority believes it would be equitable and fair to increase our number of hours as well. The more hours that are afforded to the protestants, the more opportunities or occurrences of objections that may occur. Our responses to objections or our need to object will cut into our time. And so just from a level playing field standpoint, if the oral ruling is intended to increase the hours, we would request some type of commensurate increase in the amount of time for the authority. No, we would like to stick with the original time proposals, but if there is an increase, we think it's only appropriate procedurally and substantively to enlarge the amount of time for the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I understand that. Here's what I'll do. Let me take all of this under advisement for the moment. I know you need your limits. I am going to break out the parties. I will indicate I am going to somewhat increase the time for the protesting parties. But let me think about how to make sure there's an even playing field and get back to you after we have a break this morning. Because I think it's fair that I fully consider the authority's response. And with that, are there other procedural issues? Mr. Busher, would you like to respond?
No response. Just
Okay.
one question.
Sure.
Do you have an idea for how the official time that you all keep is going to be tracked and shared with the various parties?
Yes, I do. We are tracking it daily. I don't think we've posted our time from yesterday yet, but my intent was to post that on essentially a daily basis as to what our timekeeping is, which is not necessarily, my team is doing a good job, but and we're doing our best, but it's a little bit of a stop-start clock. So give it a plus or minus a few minutes. But that is my intent, so that we're transparent on at least what our understanding of the time is. Mr. Reese.
Oh, just real quickly, I don't know if you were going to do this. I just was hoping we might be able to get some forecast of what today looks like in terms of time estimates and when we might be starting panel 3.
Sure, that would be great. And I will hear from Mr. Hitchings on your other issue. And then if you have that information, or if you can get back to me shortly, either you or Mr. Ferguson, that would be great. Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you. Just as far as scheduling, similar to the conflict on the modeling symposium coming up, one of our witnesses for panel 4, Mr. Walker, is not available on the 3rd of September. And so if we get to the next panel after panel 3 by then, we would switch the order so that our panel 5 would go on the 3rd if needed, and panel 4 would follow panel 5. Panel 5 is, I'll call our water quality panel, so to speak, in shorthand. Panel 4 is our water availability analysis. If these panels 1, 2, and 3 use up all the time through September 3rd, we're fine with the schedule as we've set, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of the need to accommodate that, and so the parties were aware we may need to accelerate or move up panel 5.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. We'll see how this plays out, but it sounds to me that it may be the case that we'll hear it, based on my guesstimate, that we may hear panel 5 first on the 3rd, based on what you just indicated, and then go back to panel 4. I don't know if you're prepared on the fly. Do you have a brief estimate, Mr. Hitchings, of just the summary of direct testimony for your panel 2 witnesses this morning?
I think for panel 2, we'll probably be able to summarize the testimony and make them available for cross within about 20 to 25 minutes. I think each witness has about maybe 10 to 15 minutes of summary, and then they would be available. And I would say for panel 3, for planning purposes, since it is a little bit more complicated and involves some modeling issues, it's probably 20 minutes each estimated for the 5 witnesses on panel 3. So that would be about an hour and 40 minutes.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then, Mr. Busher, I'll turn to you as the representative, but I realize you don't. There are a large group of what we're calling the cooperating NGO parties. Thank you for that. Do you have an estimate for your panel 2 cross?
I think the total we gave was between 2.5 and 3 hours.
Thank you.
I think given where we are now, it's safe to say we'll at least take the rest of the morning from whenever the direct examination is completed.
Yeah, thank you. And then I imagine, and then Mr. Rees, do you have questions do you anticipate for panel 2?
I do, but they're not very lengthy. They're probably 20 minutes.
Thank you. And then Mr. King, I know you'd indicated you have questions for panel 2.
Yes, that is true. Yes.
So it looks to me, I think we'll get to panel 3 in the afternoon. That's what I would say. Mr. Rees, is that some help?
That helps. Definitely, I can see it's the afternoon, probably late.
And then what I suspect is panel 3, I think panel 3 is one of the larger panels. We may very well take up most of the day tomorrow with panel 3. I guess one question would be, what we should think about is if we complete panel 3 on tomorrow, do we move to panel 4 and then pause, or do we go ahead and go to panel 5, right? And then pick up on pick up on the 3rd with panel 5. Mr. Hitching, do you have a thought about that?
So you're saying if we do complete panel 3 before the end of the day tomorrow,
Right.
start with panel 4?
That's the question. Should we start with panel 4 and then break and go to panel 5, which seems a little awkward to me?
Yeah,
Panel 5?
it seems like for continuity for all the parties would be helpful to try to keep those in their own singular blocks, so to speak. So I guess my expectation is I'd be very surprised if we finish panel 3 by the end of tomorrow. I wouldn't, I'd be fine if we did, but I think just the technical nature of the testimony and the number of witnesses. But in direct answer to your question, I think it would be better to take 5 and 4 just individually and not break them up.
Thank you. I think and regardless, I guess what I'm thinking through is that I think it's very likely we're going to hear panel 5 before panel 4, because even if we don't finish panel 3 tomorrow, we finish on the 3rd, then we would go to panel 5. So I just want to put all the parties on notice. It sounds like we will get to that water quality panel most likely before the water availability panel, if that's a fair shorthand. Mr. Ornbaum.
Yes. Well, I'd be able to cross-examine today also too, won't I?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't mean to skip. Yes.
Thank you.
After Mr. King.
I was late getting on here, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
I moved the AHO's hearing parties time tracker to the hearing documents folder on the site's FTP.
Wonderful. Thank you. And there you have it. Are there other procedural issues we should get to before we return to our subset of panel 1 witnesses? Ms. Bozzoni and Ms. Forsyth. We don't need to necessarily, well, I guess eventually we'll bring them up because we'll go to panel 2, but I will now look to the room. Does anyone have recross, keeping in mind that recross must be within the scope of the redirect by Mr. Hitchings and Mr. Ferguson that we heard yesterday? Does anyone have recross for these 2 witnesses?
I have a couple of brief questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. So if we could please bring Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bozzoni on camera. And my team is, I think, pinning the appropriate people. There we go. And we need at least Mr. Schutz, so I can see him too. There we go.
Thank you very much.
And I would,
Are we-
please go ahead,
are we
Mr.
ready?
Schutz.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Ms. Bizzoni and Ms. Forsyth. I have a brief question, and I don't really know which of you it's for, because it was kind of went back and forth yesterday. It regards the discussion of what Ms. Forsyth called continuing to use evolving science. And my question is, you all discussed what I understood to be the possibility that bypass flow requirements might increase with future ITPs or with other processes that evolved, came about during some kind of scientific investigation as time went by. My question is, would the potential change in bypass flows as you're understanding it be solely a potential increase in bypass flows, or would it also include a potential decrease in bypass flows, depending on whatever scientific events might occur over time?
This is Miss Forsyth. I think that it could be either an increase, a decrease, a change, based on the best available science and the information from CDFW as the agency with jurisdiction and oversight of these species. If we find in the future that the science has changed and indicates that something other than Wilkins Slough flows is an important factor for the health of the species, we would envision that potentially changing. I mean, the goal of an ITP is to, well, actually the statutory requirement of an ITP is to fully mitigate the impacts to the species.
So you would envision, as I understand it, the Wilkins Slough bypass flow of 10,700 or 5,000 CFS, depending on the month, as being a permit term in your water right. Is that correct?
That is not correct. We envision the permit term and the water right to be as Ms. Bizzoni indicated in her testimony, and as she described yesterday. The permit term refers to the ITP, and the authority is to operate consistent with the ITP.
And it's your understanding that the initial then permit term would be 10,700 CFS at Wilkins Slough. Is that correct?
Can you clarify what you mean by permit term? Which permit?
A water right permit issued to this authority pursuant to this hearing.
Let me just make sure I understand what you're asking. Are you asking if we envision the initial water right permit to include a term identifying 10.7 as a bypass criteria at Wilkins Slough?
Correct.
Is that your question?
Correct.
I think as Ms. Bizzoni testified yesterday, we do not envision that. We envision a permit term that requires the authority to comply with any incidental take permit issued by CDFW for the project.
Thank you. thus the State Water Board would not be the decider, as it were, of the bypass flow requirement, either initially or going forward. The decider would be the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is the agency with oversight of our aquatic and terrestrial species.
All right, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. I will look to the room. Are there others who have additional questions based on the redirect from yesterday? And feel free to speak up because I can't see all of you because I'm pinned here. All right, I think with that, we have completed witness panel 1. Is that your understanding, Mr. Hitchings?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we can move to panel 2, which is also Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni. And with that, I will turn things over. Well, I'll do it this way. Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni, do you both recall taking the oath yesterday with respect to your testimony?
I do.
And Ms.
Yes.
Bizzoni? Thank you. I appreciate that. With that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Hitchings.
Yes, thank you, Hearing Officer Kenzie, and my colleague Michelle Chester will actually be conducting the direct exam of both witnesses on this panel.
Thank you.
Good morning, Michelle Chester on behalf of Sites Authority. I just want to confirm, Hearing Officer, yesterday you requested that the witnesses provide confirmation that they have submitted a true and correct copy of their written testimony. Is that something you would like us to do again with this panel?
Ms. Chester, no, thank you, because I believe that assertion yesterday would apply to all of their testimony since we've seen these witnesses before, but thank you for following up on that.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the purpose of this panel is to address hearing issues 1A and 2A regarding whether assignment of the state filed application and release of priority of the state filed application would be for purposes of development not in conflict with any general or coordinated plan, and also to address hearing issues 1C and 2C regarding whether assignment of the state filed application and release of priority of the state filed application would deprive counties in which the water originates necessary for county's development. So the summaries from Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni today will only address those specific topics. And I will ask, just for clarity, Ms. Forsyth, could you please state your name for the record?
Alicia Forsyth.
And you understand that you're presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
I do.
At this time, can you please summarize your written testimony relevant to the topics of this panel as set forth in Cites 262?
Thank you. Can we bring up presentation or exhibit Cites 262, please?
Hi, this is the court reporter. May I ask a question at this point with exhibits on as far as the transcript goes, if that's okay? As we go forward, do you want me to put a blurb in there that an exhibit has been put up and then have it indexed, or do I need to not worry about exhibits at all?
Well, this is the odd situation where you are not retained by me. So I think this is a question actually for Mr. Hitchings and Ms. Chester and Mr. Ferguson with respect to your court reporter.
So I would ask if the hearing officer has any preference for the record that would be provided for the administrative record purposes.
I don't think you need, I think because we have the oral request to Ms. Mullen to bring up a particular exhibit, I don't think any additional notation is necessary unless Ms. Chester or Mr. Ferguson, you have a different thought on that.
My thought is that we wouldn't need a link and we could just use the reference in text, but I will look to my co-counsel if they have a different idea.
So no index at all for exhibits. That would be the easiest because it's kind of over all these days, it's gonna be hard to keep track of which one has been put up and not.
And you're requesting an index for the transcript per day of what exhibits were brought up?
That's what I'm wondering, if I need to keep track of that, if you need an index of that, or just not worry about indexing exhibits at all. I mean, it would just be like, sites exhibit 1 was identified. And then it would come up, but if it might be confusing because I'm not going to be able to keep track.
I don't even know. Can I just ask? Yeah.
Oh, and
Yeah,
this
this is Aaron Ferguson. Pardon.
Oh, Aaron, you're muted.
It sounds like there's feedback in the room. I don't know if you have another speaker.
Well, you.
And I'm sorry to do this, but it does help me going forward.
No, and I appreciate, no, this is
Okay.
not, it's not a problem. I'm not sure why we're
Okay.
having a feedback with Mr. Ferguson. This is my sense. I don't think it's necessary from my perspective, as someone
Okay.
who's not paying the bills, literally. But and part of that is because we do have an exhibit index for each party separately
Okay.
from this, and those are available in our administrative record.
Okay.
Also, we have the advantage of, Control F in Adobe PDFs of transcripts are quite useful. So from my not highly technical point of view, it doesn't seem necessary to me, but certainly
Okay.
I defer to Ms. Chester, Mr. Ferguson, and Mr. Hitchings if they have another preference.
It sounds like for now it's not necessary, and if it is requested, we will follow up with you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, it is hard to go back because yesterday, I mean, I'm just saying going forward, it would be nice to know. So at this point, I'm just gonna not worry about exhibits and just continue on with the written record. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and then I'm sorry, one more thing, because this is a new format for me as far as a panel. It's almost impossible to do a Q&A with literally QA, since there's multiple witnesses on a panel. So I'm just doing it as colloquy mostly. And then just noting who's doing the direct and cross. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Just trying to get this right so we go forward and everybody's happy with the transcript.
Yes, I think that sounds fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for all that.
Mr. Reese, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that, not having a Q&A. I mean, we need to know what witness specifically answered the question.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to say panel member Foresight instead of an answer symbol.
Okay.
So it's not going to be, so it'll be clearer who's actually answering, and it just takes up more space on a page because I'm going to have to identify who's speaking every time.
Okay, well, that's fine, as long as it's clear who's providing the answer.
Yeah, that's why I say it's hard to do a Q&A that way with the panel. So, all right, I think I'm good. Thank you for that. That really helps me go forward. And that was all off the record, by the way, because it's hard for me to write what's on me talking.
Understood.
Okay,
It
all
will
right.
be in our Zoom recording, so.
Yeah, oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Reese, thank you for that follow-up. I entirely agree. And it's my understanding that the particular witness who is speaking will be identified. So that makes sense. I believe with that, I will turn things back to you, Ms. Chester.
And I will turn it over to Ms. Forsythe.
Thank you.
All right, and I will ask Ms. Mullins if she can move to page 15, please. Thank you, Ms. Mullins. I appreciate that. All right, on this panel, I am summarizing my testimony relative to the specific topics that Ms. Chester mentioned. More specifically, my testimony addresses whether the assignment of the state filed application and release of priority of various state filed applications would be for the purposes of development, not in conflict with any general plan or coordinated plan. We can move to the next slide. As described in my testimony, I participated in and oversaw the preparation of the authority's petition for partial assignment of state filed application 25517 and the petitions for release of priority from state filed applications 25513, 25514, 25517, the unassigned portion, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of the Sites Project Authority's water right application. With regard to the petition for partial assignment and preparation of the authority's application, the authority considered whether the Sites Project is substantially in accord with the state application and not in conflict with a general or coordinated plan or with water quality objectives. I'll walk through these 3 items in this overview presentation. Next slide. Based upon my review, the authority's Sites Project is substantially in accord with the state filed application 25517. As background, the state filed application was for a project called Colusa Reservoir. Colusa Reservoir was proposed for generally the same location as Sites Reservoir, but encompassed the drainage to the north of Sites Reservoir. This made Colusa Reservoir a larger project than Sites at 3.2 million acre feet of total storage. And in general, the differences between Sites Reservoir and the then proposed Colusa Reservoir reflect the smaller size of Sites Reservoir as it's proposed today. Next slide. Both Colusa Reservoir and Sites Reservoir have the same sources and same points of diversion. However, due to the larger size of Colusa Reservoir, the state filed application also included an additional source, Willow Creek, which is located to the north of the currently proposed Sites Reservoir. The state filed application also includes Willow Creek and Willow Dam as points of diversion, which are not included and unnecessary in the Sites water right application due to the smaller size of Sites Reservoir. Purposes of use are the same. However, the authority has added 5 incidental uses based on what we understand to be the possible current incidental uses within the proposed place of use in the authority's application. Next slide. The authority's application has the same diversion rate as the state filed application, but reflects a reduced diversion to storage to reflect the smaller size of Sites Reservoir. The authority has also included a shorter diversion season to reflect the season when the Sacramento River is not fully appropriated. The place of use in both applications is generally the same. However, the authority's application does reflect a larger place of use to include portions of the Central Valley project. This larger place of use in the Sites application allows for Sites water to be used by the anticipated storage partners, including local agencies in Colusa and Yolo counties, and by Reclamation as a storage partner. With Reclamation's participation in Sites Reservoir, the proposed, along with the Proposition 1 benefits accruing to wildlife refuges located in the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin Valley, the Sites Project diverse partnerships lead to an inherently larger place of use than solely the state water project place of use. Next slide. The assignment of state filed application 25517 to the authority for the purposes of the Sites project is otherwise not in conflict with a general or coordinated plan. A Northern California reservoir supplied by a diversion from the Sacramento River has been identified for a number of decades through updates to the state water plan, related studies, and statewide policy. Next slide. Reclamation evaluated a predecessor to Sites Reservoir as early as 1957, when DWR Bulletin Number 3, the California Water Plan, identified a 48,000 acre-foot reservoir on Stone Corral and Funk's Creek to provide flood control and water supply benefits. In 1975, DWR's progress report on major surface water development opportunities in the Sacramento Valley evaluated 4 possible water development opportunities to meet future statewide water requirements. This included Colusa Reservoir, which, as I have previously discussed, is in the same location as Sites Reservoir, but was larger, including those drainages to the north. Releases from Colusa Reservoir were envisioned for local use and for the conveyance to the Colusa Basin drain for statewide use. The Colusa Reservoir was proposed in the DWR progress report as a modification and enlargement to Reclamation's previously proposed Sites Reservoir, which Reclamation considered in a feasibility report entitled West Sacramento Canal Unit Central Valley Project. Next slide. DWR Bulletin 7681, titled State Water Project, Status of Water Conservation and Water Supply Augmentation Plans, was published in 1981. This DWR bulletin evaluated water conservation, groundwater storage, surface storage, and exchanges to provide additional water supply, flood control, recreation, and ecosystem benefits. The bulletin identified that studies of Colusa Reservoir, quote, indicated that the incremental cost of storage is excessive in comparison to storage costs of Sites Reservoir, end quote, and proposed that the Colusa Reservoir plan not be proposed for full feasibility analysis. In 1995, the CalFed Bay Delta program evaluated 12 program components, including expanding both surface and groundwater storage capacity. Sites Reservoir was considered throughout the CalFed program and included in the CalFed Record of Decision as a project for continued consideration. Next slide. And bringing us to our modern times, the Sites project was included in the state's 2020 Water Resiliency Portfolio, which identified a need for surface storage to benefit water supply reliability and the environment, and proposed accelerating permitting for the Proposition 1 water storage investment projects, including Sites Reservoir. The state's 2022 water supply strategy builds upon the 2020 Water Resiliency Portfolio and projects an up to 10% reduction in existing water supplies in the state by 2040. The 2022 strategy identifies implementation steps for state agencies to work towards completion of those Proposition 1 WISIP projects. And finally, the state's 2023 State Water Plan update references the governor's water supply strategy, including advancements of those Proposition 1 storage projects, such as Sites Reservoir. It also establishes a roadmap to resilience, establishing recommendations to invest in water infrastructure systems, including expanding storage. While the specific plans have changed and adjusted over time as our societal views have changed and evolved, an off-stream storage in Northern California with a diversion off the Sacramento River to supply statewide water needs has been envisioned for many decades. Sites Reservoir, as proposed by the authority, is consistent with these plans and is otherwise not in conflict. Next slide. The assignment of State Filed Application 22517 to the authority for the purposes of the Sites project is otherwise not in conflict with water quality objectives established pursuant to law. As discussed in the final EIR, applicable water quality objectives in the project area are the Water Quality Control Plan for the Sacramento and San Joaquin River basins and the Water Quality Control Plan for the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta Estuary. The final EIR concludes that none of the project alternatives would conflict with or obstruct implementation of any water quality control plan during construction and operations of the project. Next slide. The final EIR included an expansive analysis of water quality constituents potentially affected by the project. As discussed in the petition for partial assignment, methylmercury and metals may temporarily degrade water quality as a result of construction and operations of the project. The project does not alter net mercury discharge to the environment, but may alter how much methyl mercury is present within the reservoir and downstream, along with the timing of those discharges. The final EIR includes mitigation measure WQ 1.1 and requires that the authority implement actions to reduce methyl mercury production during construction and operations. The effectiveness of these measures can be very location specific, and recognizing the uncertainty of the effectiveness of these measures in reducing concentrations at site's reservoir, the impact was identified as significant and unavoidable. The specific analysis of mercury and methyl mercury production and the measures the authority plans to implement to manage mercury are discussed in detail in the testimony of Mr. Cameron Irvine. The final EIR also identified 2 less than significant impacts to metals in Stone Corral Creek and metals and pesticides in the Yolo bypass. Mitigation measures would reduce both of these impacts to less than significant. Next slide. The project could also result in water quality improvements, enhancing beneficial uses of water in a number of ways. These improvements could include assisting with delta outflow and preventing seawater intrusion in the delta, aiding in achieving cold water benefits in the upper Sacramento River, providing flows to move fish food into the Sacramento River and the delta through the Proposition 1 benefits, providing water for wildlife refuges, again, through the Proposition 1 benefits, and creating in-reservoir habitat for warm water fish species. Improvements in water quality could also support and increase water supply reliability for other beneficial uses designated by the water quality control plans, including recreation, municipal, and agricultural supplies. Next slide. In development of the petitions for release of priority, the authority also considered whether the project is for the purpose of development, not in conflict with such a general or coordinated plan, or with water quality objectives established pursuant to law. For the same reasons as I have discussed previously, the release of priority of the state filed applications mentioned previously would not be in conflict with a general or coordinated plan. The release from priority would achieve similar purposes as were identified in the Colusa Reservoir project and would not conflict with the purposes in the remaining petitions. For the same reasons as I have discussed previously, the release of priority of state filed applications requested by the authority would also not be in conflict with water quality objectives. The authority has presented substantial evidence that the requested partial assignment and release from priority are for the purposes of development consistent with the California Water Plan and other like plans for the control, protection, development, utilization, and conservation of water resources in our state. And we have also presented evidence to demonstrate consistency with applicable water quality control plans and their water quality objectives. This concludes my oral summary.
Thank you, Ms. Forsyth.
Thank you.
Ms. Chester, please go ahead.
I'll move to Ms. Bizzoni. Ms. Bizzoni, would you please state your name for the record?
Angela Bizzoni.
And you understand that you're presenting testimony under oath, is that correct?
Yes.
At this time, can you please summarize your written testimony relevant to the topics you are covering on this witness panel as set forth in cites 259?
Yes. And when you open cites 259, please start at slide 17. Thank you. Today, I will present testimony regarding the Sites Project Authority's petitions for partial assignment and release from priority. I will cover the remaining portion of my testimony regarding the water availability analysis as part of Sites Panel 4. Next slide. The topics I will cover include a brief summary of the petition for partial assignment petitions for release from priority, and considerations for the counties of origin. Most of my discussion will focus on this last topic and consideration of whether the petitions would negatively impact a county in which water originates. Next slide. Ms. Forsythe has already provided an overview of the state filings. I will just touch on it again to set the stage for this discussion. State filing application 25517 has a priority date of September 30th, 1977. It includes the sources identified here: Willow Creek, Funks Creek, Stone Crow Creek, and Sacramento River. It also identifies year-round direct diversion and a combined diversion to storage of over 3 million acre-feet. The authority has requested partial assignment of this filing. The notable differences are that the petition for assignment does not include Willow Creek as a source or include direct diversion. It also limits the total volume to be diverted to storage at 1.5 million acre-feet annually and a diversion season of September 1 through June 14th. Next slide. The authority has petitioned for release from priority of several state filings. This includes any portion of 25517 not assigned to the Sites Authority, as well as the 5 other state filings that are summarized on this slide. Next slide. The Sacramento River flow proposed to be diverted under the Sites project originates in Shasta and Tehama counties. Based on information obtained from the Northern Sacramento Valley Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, there is an estimated combined increase of 57.3 thousand acre-feet of agricultural and M&I demands in Shasta and Tehama counties by 2035. Next slide. Based on information in the water availability analysis, there is an estimated annual average range of 462 to 1.172 million acre-feet available in the Sacramento River after proposed sites project diversions. This volume remaining in the river exceeds the projected combined demands of the counties discussed on the prior slide, which indicates there would be water available to support future demands in Shasta and Tehama counties after partial assignment of 25517 and considering the petitions for for release from priority. Next slide. Flows in Funks and Stone Corral Creeks proposed to be diverted as part of the Sites project originate in Glenn and Colusa counties. Based on information obtained from the same source, the Northern Sacramento Valley RWMP, there is an estimated combined increase of about 93,000 acre-feet in agricultural and M&I demands in Glenn and Colusa counties by 2035. Next slide. Through the water availability analysis, it is estimated that there is an annual average combined flow of approximately 14.1 thousand acre-feet in the creeks at the proposed dam locations. The authority in Colusa County have entered into a memorandum of understanding stating that inflow from the creeks collected to storage in Sites Reservoir will first be allocated to Colusa County. The MOU allows for other beneficiaries, including Glenn County, to these county of origin benefits. This ensures that Glenn and Colusa County would not be deprived of water they need from Funks and Stone Corral Creeks. Next slide. In conclusion, water is available in the Sacramento River beyond what would be used for the Sites project to support projected future demands in Shasta and Tehama counties. The authority's executed MOU with Colusa County ensures water available in these creeks for Diversion by Sites Reservoir is available to Colusa County and possibly Gidding County, thereby ensuring the project will not deprive these counties of water needed for local development. And that concludes my oral testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni. I appreciate this. I think with that, we will move. It is 10:16, but I'd be inclined to see first, looking to the room. Does DWR, Reclamation, or State Water Contractors have any questions for this panel of witnesses?
Good morning, this is Eric Sutherland. DWR does not have any questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, this is Jenna Mandel Rice. State Water Contractors does not have any questions for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is Ray Sahlberg, Bureau of Reclamation. We have no questions.
Thank you. That's clear. I'll look to the coordinating NGO parties. I assume you have questions for this panel of witnesses. My question is actually, which of you plans on asking these questions first from the coordinating NGO parties?
I don't think we've resolved that.
Okay, great.
But
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
I think I'm probably likely to be nominated, and I have about.
Well, you can work it out over the break. I was just giving us
can.
a little forecast about where we're going, and then
I think
Mr.
I have about an hour.
Okay, great. And then Mr. Rees, you indicated you had something like 20 to 30 minutes. Is that right?
15 to 20.
And do you have a preference whether you go now or after the NGO parties?
I prefer to go after the NGO parties. I might limit the questioning further.
Yes, it does tend to do that. So we'll keep to our normal order then. Let's go ahead and take a 13-minute break. We'll return at 10:30, and then we'll pick up with cross-examination. Sounds like most likely from you, Mr. Schutz. Please remember to go on All right, it is 10:30. I want to make sure Ms. Knott, our reporter here, is ready to go. Can you give me a verbal or a thumbs up?
Thank you. I am ready. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. With that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Schutz. I see you have questions for these witnesses.
I do. Thank you very much. Good morning again, Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Pizzoni. And y'all are on mute if doesn't matter that much. So these questions go specifically to potential conflict with the water quality control plan. And that's the context in which I think we'd like to look at this. And I'm stating that in part for the benefit of Ms. Chester, because it may seem that we're going a little outside of what the organizing principles are of Ms. Bizzoni's testimony in particular, but viewing it within the context of the update of the Bay Delta plan, I think there is good reason to do it this way. So I'd like to start with Ms. Forsyth, and then I'll turn to Ms. Bizzoni and then do a little follow-up with Ms. Forsyth. Could we pull up, well, I'll start and you all can decide whether or not you need to pull up Ms. Forsyth's testimony. Ms. Forsyth, on page 15 of your testimony, on lines 21 to 23, you say, the final EIR concludes that none of the project alternatives would conflict or obstruct implementation of any water quality control plan during construction or operation of the project. Do you see that?
Can you repeat the line numbers again, Mr. Schutz?
21 to 23, page 15.
Yes, I see that.
So you say that you state what the final EIR concludes. I assume, am I correct in assuming that it's your opinion that you agree with that conclusion?
I would say yes. I will say I'm not a water quality expert, but based on the analysis presented in the document, I agree with that conclusion.
Thank you. Yesterday, you stated, and I'm going to do this as accurately as I can, you stated that the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan was in review status or a review state. Do you recall that?
I do recall that, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Forsyth, are you aware that there are proposed voluntary agreements structured to become the new Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan that are currently under review?
I am aware of those, yes.
Are you also aware that one premise of the voluntary agreements as proposed is to reduce flows for delta outflow that would be additive to those that would otherwise occur under current regulatory requirements and constraints?
I am aware of that, yes.
To your knowledge, do most of the site's proponents and storage partners support the voluntary agreements?
Objection, ask for speculation.
I asked if it was to her knowledge.
I think that's fair. Overruled. You can answer to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, I believe so, although we have never discussed this specifically as a board in that context. Our board has not taken a position on the voluntary agreements.
I understand. Sorry, was there something else? Okay. So I'm going to make a statement and we can pull up a supporting exhibit if we want. If we look at AHO 279, the draft staff report for the update of the Bay Delta Plan, Exhibit G1, Appendix G1. On page 96, it states that DWR is it shows that DWR is a supporter. And on page 99, it shows Metropolitan Water District is a supporter. And on page 101, it shows the state water contractors are supporters of the voluntary agreements. And on page 103, it shows Glen Calusa Irrigation District is a supporter. And on 107, it shows Reclamation is a supporter. And on 111, it shows that Tehama Calusa, and I don't remember what the rest of the acronym or the title is, entity is also a supporter of the voluntary agreements. Does that surprise you?
No, it does not.
Okay, and those are all entities that are involved in a significant way in the site's water project, is proposed site's reservoir project. Is that correct?
That is correct. I will say that Reclamation and the state water contractors, or excuse me, DWR and the state water contractors in and of themselves are not participants.
Thank you. Ms. Forsyth, isn't it true that diversions to sites reservoir, as you propose them in the site's application, would substantially reduce delta outflow, particularly in above normal and below normal years?
I don't believe it.
Chad, object at vague as to the word substantially.
Okay, I'll get to that quantitatively in a discussion with Ms. Bizzoni, and then we can come back to that. Is that okay?
I'm sorry, Mr. Schutz, what was your explanation? You're going to get to what, when?
The question of what substantial means is something that might be better understood if it were quantified. And in discussion with Ms. Bizzoni, I plan to go into quantification.
But in your question to Ms. Forsyth,
the question was, would it substantially reduce delta outflow? And Mr. Ferguson objected because substantial is vague.
So let's
right. Can we park the question and ask the question again once we look at some quantification?
Yes, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to now turn to Ms. Bizzoni. And could we please pull up Exhibit CSPA 17, slide 2? Ms. Mullen, I believe that was sent to you yesterday and you acknowledged receipt.
And we'll get there in this rhythm. It just takes a moment or two sometimes.
Understood.
This is when we're patient. Ms. Mullen is generally, in my opinion, remarkably fast. So here we have it.
I am very glad I do not have her job. Next slide, please, number 2. So, good morning again, Ms. Bizzoni. I show you now this exhibit. The slide shows table 2, 3, and table 4 from exhibit AHO 48, which is an MBK technical memo on sites and the voluntary agreements. You're one of the authors of this technical memo, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and do you recognize these tables?
I assume they are from that document. They're definitely an MBK formatted table.
Thank you very much. And as stated, the provenance is shown at the top of the slide here. And I just excerpted these rather than going to the original for purposes of convenient side-by-side comparison. Ms. Bizzoni, turning to these tables, table 3 shows the purported average additions to delta outflow by water year type under proposed voluntary agreements, not including any changes in the San Joaquin watershed. Is that correct?
That is what this table is titled.
Okay. Nothing more than that. I mean, you were one of the authors of this document.
I am one of the authors of this document. The more technical details and calculations were done by my colleague, Mr. Walker. I definitely can speak to it in generalities. However, more of the calculations and technical details are more directly for Mr. Walker, and this would be information we would present as part of panel 4. So I will do my best to answer questions. However, I did not do this analysis.
All right, thank you. That's a good clarification. Table 3 shows the average additions on a month-by-month basis, and also in the far right column on an annual basis of that the voluntary agreements purport to add to delta outflow. Is that an accurate description of what these tables show?
These are average monthly values by year type.
Thank you. And table 4 has a similar structure to table 3, correct?
Yes.
And table 4 subtracts from the purported additions in table 3 the average sites diversions by water year type. Is that also correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's focus in each table on the far right column for above normal water years. The number in table 3 is 600, 1,000 acre feet. Do you see that? Is that correct?
Yes, I do see that.
Very good. And in table 4, the corresponding number is negative 84,000 acre feet. Do you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
Okay. In comparing these, would it be correct to say on an average annual basis that in above normal years, the diversion to sites would be greater than the additions to delta outflow from the voluntary agreements?
I don't believe that I would generalize the information in these tables in that way. I think it is important to look at the individual months and to see where those differences lie. Looking at the annual average for a specific year type loses that significant detail month to month.
I agree that there's value in looking at the months. I was asking though specifically about the aggregate for the water years.
That would be an average annual for above normal year types.
Thank you. So let's make the same comparison or similar comparison for below normal water years. Table 3 shows that the voluntary agreements would, on average, in below normal water years, add a purported 521,000 acre feet to delta outflow. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And we see in table 4, when sites diversions in below normal years are subtracted from the purported VA additions in below normal water years, the net addition to annual delta outflow on average would only be 178,000 acre feet. Is that correct?
That is correct. I, again, believe that the entire table should be taken in consideration and not simply the total value.
Thank you. So summarizing for below normal water years, on an average annual basis, sites withdrawals would reduce net annual additions under the voluntary agreements by about 65%. 65%. Is that how you'd track it?
I don't believe that I would state a conclusion that way based on this information, no.
Turning now to your testimony for a minute, you say in footnote 12 on page 11, diversions for the project are primarily anticipated to occur during wet periods for use during dry periods.
Can you mention
I
your
can state
reference
that
again?
again, sure. Footnote 12 on page 11.
Thank you.
You state that diversions for the project are primarily anticipated to occur during wet periods for use during dry periods. You found that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can we turn to slide 3 of CSPA 17? Thank you. So this is a screenshot from the AHO 49, the calculator that MDK developed for use in evaluating diversions to sites reservoir and contrasting them with additions to delta outflow. And the specific location in that calculator from which this screenshot was taken is shown there in the second bullet, columns AM through BA, rows 35 to 42. And this is simply as downloaded. I made no additional changes in the control panel when I took this screenshot. Ms. Bizzoni, were you part of the, were you involved in the development of this tool?
Objection, lack of foundation. Just testified about where you got it from. You can bring up the document.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the objection. Mr. Schutz was just asking whether Ms. Bizzoni was involved in the development of this what is now titled AHO 49.
I
So
don't think we have enough information to confirm that this is AHO 49 or Ms. Bizzoni's familiarity with that document.
well, let's bring up AHO 49. Mr. Schutz, can you?
That's fine.
If you can tell us, is there? Well, let's bring it up, and I don't know if there are multiple tabs. You may have to guide us.
There are multiple tabs, and if you would go back to the previous to slide 3, please, Ms. Mullen. It would allow me to
tell us where to go.
Tell us where to go. Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Schutz, you have this information so we can move over to
I do.
AHO 49. Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
And thank you. If you go to the tab.
Well, let me pause here. Ms. Bizzoni, is there a particular place you'd like to go in this view to verify that this is that you recognize this spreadsheet? I should ask first, do you recognize the spreadsheet?
I recognize the spreadsheet.
And is there a particular place you need to go to verify it is what you think it is?
No, we have not noted any concerns with the AHO record exhibits, not record.
Thank you. Understood. All right, with that, back to you, Mr. Schutz. Where should we go?
To the table tab, please. And if you scroll across to columns AM to BA, you're going to have to scroll across a ways. There you go. And if you scroll down to lines 35 to 42. There you go. That is the screenshot. Now, you've got an issue there. You may need to expand there you go. And now I'm going to make a comparison. So it's the bottom. What I've reproduced is right there on the bottom.
Mr. Schutz, may I suggest that you ask your questions based on this view that we have now? I think that would be more efficient if that works for you.
Sure, it's a little hard to focus, and it may be harder for Ms. Bizzoni, but I'd be glad to do that.
Ms. Bizzoni and Mr. And anyone else, if you need if you need help trying to read it, or if we're able to zoom in some way that's helpful, let me know. I have my glasses on so I can read it.
Okay. So let's look at the breakdown of diversions by water year to sites by water year types. That's what this is showing.
Objection, is there a question?
Trying to establish the context. This is showing average annual diversions to sites by month by water year type.
Mr. Schutz, ask it as a question, please. Make sure there's a question word in there.
There will be a question.
Okay.
So, okay, let's just state it this way. Ms. Bizzoni, is it correct that what this table shows in the lines specified is diversions in every water year type on average basis, averaged across water year types for each month and for the totals?
I would object as to vague as to lines shown.
Let me clarify.
I'm sorry, I didn't get who that was. I didn't.
Aaron Ferguson.
Sorry. Mr. Schutz, it was a good question. Let's try it again with the particular lines that you're referring to.
Ms. Bizzoni, referring to columns AM through BA, lines 35 to 42, is what we're looking at here. The average annual diversions to sites reservoirs by month according to water year type. And in the right-hand column, the total average annual diversions and the total annual average diversions.
I don't feel like I would need to see more information to make sure that I understand the full context of this table in this analysis spreadsheet. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Walker was responsible for the majority of the analysis and the calculations. And although I did perform some level of review, having a summary table on screen without being able to look into the details, I'm not comfortable stating exactly what this is. I would need a little bit of time to feel comfortable with speaking to this spreadsheet.
Well, we're kind of at an impasse here because this is material that the Sites Authority presented. The previous exhibit that we talked about, Exhibit 48, was signed by Miss Bozzoni as well as Mr. Walker. And I think we're getting caught up in the concerns about provenance and what something says regarding something that the authority has basically produced, and which Miss Bozzoni has produced as well. I mean,
she has made clear that Mr. Walker will be available on panel 4 to speak to these points.
And I guess I can clarify, I was an author of the report, but that doesn't mean that I did every single calculation. There are multiple ways that we looked at water availability as well as diversions. And during that time, literally that time while you were speaking, I was able to review what I needed to within this spreadsheet. And this is information from what we call our historical water availability analysis. However, there's important context for the historical water availability analysis and how it was used in this setting in coordination with the VAs. We intentionally used this as it shows the greatest potential diversions under the project. It does not consider any project operations when arriving at these numbers. We wanted to make sure that we were not limiting our analysis in any way, and therefore we use these greater numbers. These would not be similar if you looked in the calcium analysis, for example, which looks at entire project operations, including reservoir storage. So I think there is context here that is part of what Mr. Walker would be more appropriate to speak to. And I think that context is appropriate.
that's fair enough. And I'll stipulate that what this shows is not what actual diversions there would be, but what the authors labeled potential diversions. And that this is sort of an outside bound. But and I'm not concerned so much here. My questions are not concerned so much with the specific numbers, but with the general pattern of diversion that's shown and the months in which diversions occur. So we can agree that there would likely be reduced amounts.
Mr. Schutz, we need a question. This is cross-examination. Okay. This sounds like testimony, so I want to focus you back on a question for our witnesses, please.
Okay. So looking at this spreadsheet, considering the caveats you just stated, Ms. Bozzoni, there are diversions to sites storage in April, May, and June in above normals and below normal years as shown in this figure. Is that correct?
Yes, as an average annual and those year types.
Thank you. And there are also diversions shown in March. Is that correct? In all of the water types.
Yes.
Thank you. So now looking at your testimony on page 22, lines 6 through 8, you say that VA flow assets are proposed to be deployed primarily during March through May of above normal, below normal, and dry years, correct?
Yes, that is what is written.
And you also say on page 22, lines 3 to 4, these analyses indicate that potential project diversions and VA flow assets have limited interaction. Isn't that correct?
That is correct when looking at the year-to-year analysis we performed.
Right. So by interaction, do you mean that diversions to sites and release of voluntary agreement flow assets would not happen at the same time? Is that what you're talking about in terms of interaction?
Yes.
But we're seeing here that we have considerable diversions to sites in March, April, and May of above normal years, and somewhat less in below normal years, but still what's showing is 100,000 plus acre feet of diversion to sites in March of below normal years, for example.
Objection, vague and ambiguous as to considerable, and then just the remainder of the question was ambiguous.
If you, Mr. Schutz, if you can just break down the question, I think there were several parts to it. Let's try that.
Sure. We're seeing, are we not, in this table, in above normal years, diversions in March of above normal years, we're seeing something that indicates an average of 117,000 acre feet per year. Is that correct?
In March of above normal years?
Correct.
Yes, that is what's shown here.
Okay, and what's shown from April of above normal years is 65,000 and change?
Correct, for April of above normal years.
And for May of above normal years, greater than 132,000 acre feet.
Yes.
So at least on a month-by-month basis, doesn't there appear to be considerable interaction between the deployment of VA assets and diversions to sites reservoir in above normal years?
The statement in my testimony is based on the year-by-year analysis and not these annual averages by water year type and monthly values.
Okay. So that suggests that sites would not divert when VA assets are being released?
That is not what the conclusion of my testimony is. It's that there is limited interaction during those, based on the information available to date.
Okay, but this seems to show that there's somewhat other than limited interaction, does it not?
Objection, vague, yeah, argumentative, ambiguous.
I'm going to sustain with respect to some of those. I think we've been over this, Mr. Schutz, that my understanding from Ms. Bizzoni's testimony so far.
So, Ms. Bizzoni, when you're talking in going back to footnote 12 on page 11, you're talking about you talk of wet periods.
Yes.
When you're talking about wet periods, that's on a relatively short time scale, not an annual time scale, isn't it?
That is correct. There can be a wet period during any year.
Thank you. Even during a critically dry year?
Yes, we have seen the bypasses flow in years that are later defined as critical.
Okay, I mean, I think this is important to understand in terms of the generalizations that are made and that Ms. Bizzoni has made in particular.
Objection, not in the form of question.
Sustained. Please make sure you're not testifying, Mr. Schutz.
Okay. Can we go back to Ms. Forsyth, please? So, Ms. Forsyth, you stated that, well, going back to the question of substantially reduced delta outflow, this is the quantification that I'm looking at. And so I'm going to ask you again, do you see no conflict between increased diversions under a site's water right as proposed and the stated purpose of the voluntary agreements to be additive to delta outflow, considering the voluntary agreements as the potential?
Objection, Beg.
Excuse me, may I finish the sentence?
Oh, I thought you were done. Pardon me.
As the potential update of the Bay Delta plan.
Objection, Beg.
Say overruled. Ms. Forsyth, you can answer and caveat as appropriate.
I appreciate that, Hearing Officer Kinsey. I think as Ms. Bizzoni indicated, these numbers provide some insight, but I will say have a more limited insight as to interaction of sites and the voluntary agreements. This was intended as a pretty conservative, meaning an overestimate of diversions into sites reservoir in combination with the voluntary agreements. I think it's important to look on a day-by-day basis of how sites diversions would interact on a day-by-day basis for the voluntary agreements. I will also say that this analysis was based on the information that we had available at the time, and Mr. Walker would be best to speak to this. I believe done back in I want to say 2023 timeframe, and our knowledge and understanding of the voluntary agreements has also developed and progressed since that time. So I view this analysis as quite an overestimate. I think we need to look at it on a daily basis.
Big and
because these
overestimate.
resources are going to function on a daily basis.
So how big an overestimate do you think it is? You said quite an overestimate. How big is that?
Maybe I should retract the quite because I can't quantify that, but I believe they are an overestimate based on my previous discussions with Mr. Walker and the testimony today from Ms. Bizzoni.
So looking at this qualitatively, do you disagree that there would be diversions to sites reservoir in March, April, and May of above normal years?
I do not disagree with that, but I am not basing that based on this table.
You disagree that there would be diversions to sites reservoir in March and April, and in some cases in May of below normal years?
Objection, compound.
Well, let me sustain, but let me ask you, Mr. Schutz, if you can, I'm having a hard time with the negative here. Can we ask what she agrees with? Would that work for your question? I'm trying to follow.
Sure. Would you agree that there are diversions to sites reservoir? There would be diversions to site reservoir in March, April, and May of above normal years.
I think I agree with that, depending on the in-river conditions.
And would there be diversions to sites reservoir in, let's just say, March and April of below normal years?
I think it is totally possible as long as the diversion criteria are met.
Very good. And is it your opinion, and you are the one who stated that there's no conflict, but between sites reservoir and a and a water quality control plan. Reminding you of that, would you say there's no conflict between sites diversions and voluntary agreements if they're adopted as the update of the Bay Delta plan?
Objections, calls for speculation.
No, it calls for a conclusion of an expert witness who's testified that there's no conflict.
Ms. Forsyth is not being provided as an expert witness.
Mr. Schutz, I'm thinking about this objection. Can we point to the testimony in Ms. Forsyth's, her written testimony that you're referring to? I think we were looking at it, weren't we? Do you have a citation? Was it page 15 we were looking at?
Yes, it's page 15, paragraph 56, lines 14 and 15.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I don't have my exhibit number right in front of me.
It's site
That's
71.
71.
So I see this, and I'm going to ask Ms. Chester and where Ms. Forsyth testifies the project is otherwise not in conflict with water quality objectives. Does your objection still stand based on the testimony from Ms. Forsyth?
I'll turn to Aaron, who lodged the objection specifically.
Oh, thank you. His camera went off, so I forgot about him. Not really, but
Yep, sorry about that. We can withdraw it.
thank you.
My testimony identifies that the project is otherwise not in conflict with water quality objectives established pursuant to law. I would argue that the voluntary agreements or healthy rivers is not yet established pursuant to law.
If it were established pursuant to law, would there be a conflict?
Objection calls for speculation.
It does. On the other hand,
Hold on, Mr. Schutz.
Okay.
I have a question. If the VA agreements are incorporated into the Bay Delta Plan update, would your testimony in paragraph 56 change, Ms. Forsyth? And I don't know is on the table as an answer. Yeah.
Don't know offhand. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. Of course, if the voluntary agreements are incorporated as part of the water quality control plan and the plan is updated and accepted, I don't know the right terminology, but accepted by the board, sites would be obligated to comply with the plan. I think our thought around the voluntary agreements as a technical team, not necessarily from our board of directors, is that it is a component that is important to the future of our state. And we would work to ensure that we would not be in conflict. Exactly how we would do that, I think right now is a little tricky because the voluntary agreements haven't been finalized. So understanding exactly how they're going to be implemented on a day-to-day basis is a little bit tricky. And that's important because sites, reservoirs, diversions are on a day-to-day basis. You know, we are not like the CBP and the State Water Project that are constantly diverting water. Just by the nature of their projects, we are diverting when those higher flows come through the Sacramento River system, you know, in response to rainfall events. So this needs to be looked at very carefully on a day-to-day basis to ask ourselves, you know, when are the sites project diversions allowed under the diversion criteria? And what is happening with VAs at that time? And that's something that becomes sort of is a little bit of the I don't know. You know, generally sites is diverting at a fairly decent flow with our 10-7 criteria at Wilkins Slough. That's generally a time when we're seeing higher delta outflow. would the voluntary agreement assets be deployed during a time when we're already seeing higher delta outflow? And those are the decisions and the things that we think about. Or would they hold those voluntary agreement assets until delta outflow is lower and those assets have more value to the environment? These are the tricky questions that we think about as a team in thinking about sites and voluntary agreements together.
Thank you, Ms. Forsyth. I think this may be a question for council. I'll run it by council first before, I'm not sure this is the right panel, or maybe this is a question that I have for council, and then I'll give it back to you, Mr. Schutz, I promise. My question to a great extent is, well, one aspect of my question is I'm thinking about the timing of this hearing, right? Which is we have this simultaneous process for updating the Bay Delta plan, which may or may not include voluntary agreements. Plus we are running this hearing, which the evidentiary portion will conclude at some point, and it's unclear when it will conclude in relation to these other processes that are ongoing before the board. My question is whether it's the authority's position that the board may need to reopen any permit that might be issued pursuant to this proceeding to incorporate additional terms and conditions if the voluntary agreements are included as part of the Bay Delta plan update. And you may not be, I'm putting you on the spot on this question, but I wanted to highlight it. I think it's in our hearing issues. Do you have the attorneys have a response? I'm not sure it's fair for your witnesses, but you're welcome to turn to your witnesses. Do you have a response to that?
Yes, Officer Kenzie, Andrew Hitchings. We've indicated in our application that we've requested and we expect that term 96, the standard permit term, will be included in any permit that's issued. And that retains jurisdiction to the state board to amend water rates to be consistent with any updates to water quality control planning. And so however the state board would go about that process, I wouldn't expect that it would be directed at one water right holder in the Bay Delta watershed, but that would ultimately be a state board decision as to how it would exercise that reserved jurisdiction under term 96. And that term, I think this was testified to yesterday, is in numerous hundreds of permits in the Bay Delta watershed. And so the board has that opportunity to utilize its continuing jurisdiction under that term with whichever water right holders have that within their permit. And so I think that is one of the legal and regulatory mechanisms that is out there that allows the board to act and not always have to just delay until the next triennial review is done. Even if that triennial review takes more than 3 years, we'd otherwise be in a delayed state where no action could be taken. Term 96 allows actions to be taken with the understanding that there could be amendments pursuant to the board's jurisdiction.
Thank you. Understood, Mr. Hitchings, and I appreciate that response. Ms. Forsyth, I think I have one follow-up question for you, which I believe we covered somewhat yesterday, but just to clarify, is it correct that based on your understanding, and if this is a question, this may be a question you refer me to panel 4, and that's fine. You can say that. In your understanding, is it correct that the content and regulatory requirements under the Bay Delta plan update, whatever that is, we don't know, may affect, I should say, the water availability analysis that the authority has submitted for purposes of this proceeding?
Uh, sorry, I'm trying to think through this. May it affect? I would say potentially it may affect, but I also feel like, and this is, I might be going too far here in my role, but I also feel like the water availability analysis conducted by the authority looked at water availability in a number of different ways, and a number of different methodologies to try to answer that question using a whole variety of assumptions and approaches that we felt people might be interested in. And consistently, it showed water available for the project. So could it affect like a very specific analysis? I think potentially, yes. Would it affect the overall conclusions? I don't know. Because the analysis was so expansive.
Thank you. I understand that. That's fair. Thank you. With that, Mr. Schutz, I hand it back to you. Thank you for that.
I am done with these witnesses. May I respond very briefly to Mr. Hitchings and Mr. Ferguson? They were allowed to opine considerably on, what's going on in the legal sort of ramifications of this discussion.
No, Mr. Schutz, I asked them a specific question. They did get an opportunity, but you will have your chance to testify, submit closing briefs, ask further questions. So at this time, I do want to move forward from that. I intended it as a limited question. And
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bizzoni and Ms. Forsyth.
And thank you, Mr. Schutz. Mr. Busher, are you next?
Yeah, I think so.
Questions for this panel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey, and good morning again, Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni. Ms. Forsyth, I just want to clarify something. Are you here testifying as an expert on coordinated water plans and sites' impacts on meeting water quality objectives?
I have not been identified. I don't understand the distinction here quite. I think I shouldn't say I don't understand. I think Aaron and Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Chester can explain the distinction better. I am here to testify as an expert on those topics.
You are testifying as an expert on those topics.
I'm not sure that I'm saying this correctly.
Maybe let me cut to this. How about Ms. Chester? I believe you stated that Ms. Forsyth is not testifying as an expert witness. Is that correct?
It's my recollection that our witness list does not identify Ms. Forsyth as an expert, and I don't believe we submitted necessary support, like a CV specifically for Ms. Forsyth to be offered as an expert.
That is correct. Yeah, sorry, I had my terminology wrong there. That is correct.
So the opinions you're expressing in your report as it relates to this panel, your written testimony as it relates to this panel, are not the opinions of an expert witness. Is that true?
They are the opinions based on the facts presented in my testimony. So you are correct. I am not identified as an expert witness.
All right, thank you. And one other brief, hopefully brief subject before we get into some of the more complicated questions. With respect to the difference between the state filed application for 3.1 million acre feet of diversion to storage and site's application of 1.5 million acre feet of diversion to storage, am I correct in understanding that sites is asking for no right to divert any portion of that leftover 1.6 million acre feet in the state filed application?
That is correct. We are limiting our diversion amount to 1.5 million acre feet. That leaves the 1.6 remaining.
And if sites wanted to expand its diversion to storage at some point in the future, that would require
I'm sorry, you broke up for me. If sites wanted to expand its diversion to storage.
in the future, that would require a separate water rights proceeding than this one.
That is my understanding, to go beyond the 1.5.
Thank you. So I want to turn back to the water quality objectives, and I have some other questions related to those. If we could start actually with your summary presentation, Exhibit 262 at page 26. Perfect. Thank you very much, Ms. Mullen. The first bullet point there, right, those are potential benefits in water quality improvements, correct?
That is correct.
And it is uncertain as to whether those potential benefits will occur, correct?
That is correct, although I hesitate just a little bit in that the Proposition 1 WISIP benefits for water into the YOLO bypass was modeled as continuing to delta outflow. So I think it's still a potential benefit. I think that's fair.
So, and I just want to make sure we have a clean record here, right? For the potential benefits in that first bullet point, it is uncertain whether those benefits will occur, correct?
Objection vague. Mr. Busher, can you identify the language rather than stating bullets?
Sure. I mean, Ms. Forsythe, for the delta outflow and preventing seawater intrusion, that is a potential benefit, and it is uncertain whether that benefit would occur, correct?
I think that's correct.
And for the cold water benefits in the upper Sacramento River, that is a potential benefit, and it is uncertain whether it will occur, correct?
I would identify that as more certain, especially with Reclamation's involvement and participation in Sites Reservoir. Their feasibility study has been clear that they intend to use their participation in sites to some extent for cold water benefits in the upper Sacramento River system.
So I'll come back to the cold water benefits specifically in a minute. But, right, you said it is more or maybe less uncertain to occur than the delta outflow, but it is a benefit. The cold water benefits are uncertain whether they will occur, correct?
I think that's fair. Those benefits are those benefits are subject to how Reclamation utilizes its water out of Sites Reservoir.
And that uncertainty is both whether they will occur and the magnitude of the benefit that will accrue for the delta outflow and any cold water benefits, correct?
I think that's fair. We don't have a guarantee from Reclamation as to how these benefits will accrue.
And no guarantee from sites as to how the delta outflow benefits will accrue or what impact or what benefit those may have, correct?
I think that's fair.
And if we look at the language on this slide, you describe these as things that could result, correct?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
if we look at your testimony, paragraph 63 of Exhibit 71, which covers this same subject, you again refer to those as water quality improvements that could result, correct?
Yes.
So with respect to the cold water benefits, is it your understanding that the Bureau of Reclamation has obligations to meet certain temperature standards with respect to its operation of Shasta?
Yes, it is my understanding.
And so any cold water benefit through operations of Shasta as a result of the site's project would have to go beyond what reclamation was already required to do, correct?
I think there is a mix of opportunities here. There are times when reclamation simply does not. It is my understanding that there are times when reclamation simply does not have enough water to meet cold water requirements in the upper Sacramento River system. So I think there is a mix here that cites both helps them better meet their requirements in those very dire situations and years, along with opportunities to go above and beyond and do better than their requirements, is my understanding.
Do you agree with me that if reclamation is simply meeting its existing requirements for temperature through exchanges with sites, those exchanges are not having a benefit as a result of the site's project?
I do not agree with that. I think if reclamation was not otherwise able to meet those requirements because of the specific in-year hydrologic conditions, that their ability to actually meet them or get closer to meeting them because of sites is a benefit to the species.
You agree that failing to meet those requirements, for example, in a biological opinion or an incidental take permit, would be a violation of law?
Objection. Legal conclusion.
Sustained. I understand your point, though, Mr. Busher.
I want to talk about the delta outflow requirements as well. Ms. Forsyth, yesterday, Mr. Brown testified that 75% of project participants, or the water for project participants, is south of Delta. The other 25% is north of Delta. Is that an accurate understanding or recollection of his testimony?
With regard to our public water agency participation, yes.
So what does that 75-25 split not include?
Participation from the state of California and the Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay. Do you have an estimate for the percentage of the water that the Bureau or the state uses that is delivered south of Delta as opposed to north of Delta?
I do not have that offhand. No.
Can you give me your best estimate for that? 50-50, 10%, 90%?
I really would honestly have to look back at the modeling. I think it's much clearer for the state for the Prop 1 benefits. Between the YOLO bypass water and the refuge water. For reclamation, I would have to look back closely at the modeling to see what that split is.
Fair enough. Thank you. For the setting aside the reclamation and state participation, is it accurate to say that 75% of the water released from site's reservoir will go through the export pumps for delivery south of the Delta?
I think that's a fair generalization. I would not say that that is an accurate representation out of the modeling analysis.
And
but
that's
it's
fair. I am speaking in the aggregate at a very generalized level.
Mr. Busher, let the witness finish her thought, and then you can ask your next question. Ms. Forsyth, had you finished that?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Mostly did. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Busher.
And for that water that is released from Sites Reservoir that is exported for delivery south of Delta, that does not become Delta outflow, correct?
That water will have two components to it. It will have the export component to it, but there will also be a carriage water component to that water. So I don't remember the carriage water percentage offhand, and Ms. Bizzoni might, but for water that is exported south of Delta, for Sites water that is exported south of Delta, there is the physical export water. There is also water that will be allocated to carriage water to maintain water quality and Delta conditions in the Delta itself. So we will not export 100% of that water. There is a carriage water cost in the Delta.
Okay. Do you have an estimate for me of the proportion of the flow that is released from Sites Reservoir that becomes Delta outflow?
I do not offhand, but I suspect we could pull that out of the modeling.
Thank you. With respect to the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta, and we can take the shared screen down at this point. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. I really appreciate it. The Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan identifies beneficial uses for the area that the sites project will impact, including the Sacramento River, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
That includes beneficial uses for the protection of fish and wildlife, correct?
Correct.
And in your work with the Sites Project Authority, you've spent a significant amount of time thinking about and understanding the ecosystem and fish and wildlife in the Sacramento River, correct?
Objection, vague, significant amount of time.
I'll rephrase that. Do you have an understanding based on your work with the Sites Project Authority of the condition of fish and wildlife in the ecosystem in the Sacramento River?
I would say a general understanding. I'm not a specialist in the particular topics.
Okay. You have a general understanding for, well, your testimony in your written testimony is that sites will not negatively impact meeting water quality objectives related to fish and wildlife, correct?
So I think, sorry, I'm looking back at my testimony. Where did it go? I would say that my testimony is based on the analysis in the final EIR, EIS. And in that analysis, we looked at whether or not the project would conflict with implementation of the plan. Plans, plural.
So if you look at paragraph 62 of your testimony, your written testimony, The first sentence says the project includes protective operating conditions intended to ensure the project meets water quality objectives for the protection of fish and wildlife. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And is that when you say water quality objectives for the protection of fish and wildlife, does that include, or are those the same water quality objectives that are described in the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta?
I think that's fair, yes.
Based on your experience and your work with the site's project authority, including coming to that conclusion, do you believe that water quality objectives for the protection of fish and wildlife are currently being met in the Bay Delta?
I have to say that I honestly don't know. I've reviewed the plan generally, but have not looked very specifically at all of those components and details. This paragraph of my testimony is based on the conclusions in the final EIR EIS, and I believe those experts related to the water quality section went through the plan in detail. I would have expected that those experts went through the plan in detail.
Do you agree that the Bay Delta ecosystem is in crisis?
Objection.
I guess yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the objection, Mr. Ferguson?
Vague is the crisis.
I think that's fair. Mr. Busher, can you be more specific?
Let me try this way. When we pull up, well, Ms. Forsythe, are you familiar with a report that the State Water Board published in 2010 about flows in the Bay Delta watershed, a public trust report?
I am not.
Are you familiar generally with the State Water Board's findings, or not findings, State Water Board's process for updating the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan?
I generally, yes.
And can we pull up 1 second? Second.
Take your time, Mr. Busher.
Let's pull up exhibit Baykeeper 103. This doesn't have a cover page. I apologize. So, Ms. Forsythe, this is the 2023 draft staff report published by the State Water Board in November of 2023 related to phase 2 of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. Do you have a general understanding of what that draft staff report is, or that it exists?
I have a general understanding that it exists, but I have never read it.
Okay. Can we go to page 10 of the document, please? If we could zoom in on the bottom paragraph. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. About halfway, a little bit more than halfway through that paragraph the sentence starts with existing. Do you see that, Ms. Forsyth?
I see it there, yes.
So the state board says existing regulatory minimum delta outflows would not be protective of the ecosystem, and without additional in-stream flow protections, existing flows may be reduced in the future. Do you disagree with the state board's assessment that existing protections are not protective of the ecosystem?
Objection, misstates
Sorry.
testimony or misstates this exhibit. This is a staff report from the staff at the State Water Board.
With that clarification, it's a staff report, and I believe it is a draft staff report. Correct, Mr. Busher?
Yes.
And so with that clarification, please, Ms. Forsyth, go ahead.
I believe Mr. Busher asked me if I agree with this statement. I would say that without reading the context around this, it's difficult for me seeing this for the first time to agree with this particular statement. I don't disagree that this might be the possibility. I just am not comfortable without reading the context and understanding the context of the discussion to agree with it.
I just want to make sure I understand where that testimony starts and stops. Do you have any opinion as to whether the existing regulatory minimum delta outflows are protective of the ecosystem?
Do I personally have any opinion? Is that your question?
So I took your answer to whether you agreed with the draft staff report statement to be that you maybe not, but you wanted to be able to understand the entire context of the document. So I want to know.
I think that's fair.
Okay. So my question is, given that constraint, and fair enough, and I'm not going to ask you to read this whole thing now. Do you have an opinion as to whether existing regulatory minimum delta outflows are protective of the ecosystem? In whatever capacity you're here testifying today on behalf of the Sites Project Authority.
I'd say I don't have an opinion on that. However, I fully recognize that there are no doubt challenges in the Delta. We have listed species in the Delta. We have many competing interests in the Delta. And I am aware that the state board is proceeding with a revision to the water quality control plan, and there's a tremendous amount of work around the VAs and other opportunities that are geared towards improving conditions in the Delta, but I personally do not have an opinion that the existing regulatory minimum Delta outflows are or are not adequate.
Can you describe for me the basis then for your opinion? Well, strike that. I think you've already answered that. Is it correct to say that Sites Reservoir is not proposing any limitations on diversions beyond the regulatory conditions that currently or in the future will exist?
I do not believe that that is correct. Our application clearly reflects specific diversion criteria.
What are the, sorry, go ahead.
that would be our, I think Ms. Bizzoni testified as to those extensively yesterday. The ones that come particularly to mind in this context is that the project would not divert until the delta is in excess conditions. The Wilkins Slough bypass flow criteria, as described yesterday by Ms. Bizzoni, along with our pulse flow protection criteria. There are a number of other ones, but those are the ones that come to top of my mind relative to the discussion here around the delta and the ecosystem.
So let's start with the Wilkins Slough bypass criteria. My understanding from your testimony this morning was that Sites does not intend to incorporate that limitation into its permit as an actual criteria. It is merely agreeing to do what CDFW says under the incidental take permit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So for the Wilkins Slough bypass criteria, the only limitation on diversion that Sites is agreeing to is one that is imposed by a regulator, correct?
That is correct.
Um, I think I just have maybe one more question for Ms. Bizzoni. Ms. Bizzoni, in your testimony, and I'm looking at, sorry. Page 21, lines 8 and 9, part of paragraph 34. You say that the project would result in a limited reduction in delta outflow, which would primarily occur in winter months in largely wet and above normal years, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the lines?
Lines 8 and 9. It's the last two lines before the conclusion. Oh, I'm sorry, page 22. I apologize.
Okay. Yes, that is what my testimony states.
And that is, right, not expressed as a hypothetical or a could, but expressed as a reduction that will occur as a result of the project, correct?
Based on the analysis performed and submitted as AHO 49 regarding the VA analysis. So it's based on the context of the analysis we submitted in those documents.
Okay. So I'm going to follow up there. Does the project have a similar reduction in delta outflow if the VAs are not part of the water quality control plan?
I'm sorry, I don't understand it. Can you rephrase that?
So maybe I apologize. Maybe I didn't understand your answer. So the reduction you describe at lines 8 and 9 in delta outflow, you said was incorporated or based on the VA analysis? Can you help me understand like how the VAs tie into that reduction?
Oh, I meant we're saying I'm stating that was a conclusion, the use of the word would versus the use of the word could. I feel that we're saying based on our review, if you look at that analysis particularly, which I already clarified slightly with Mr. Schutz that we used one of the more conservative analyses in regard to diversions to perform this analysis that really indicated the most potential diversions under the project. So in that context, this is a would. I don't know if I would say, I feel like you're picking would versus could, and it's more of a semantics and word choice.
So no, I appreciate that. I guess my question is the conclusion on lines 8 and 9 about the reduction in delta outflow, right? Is that dependent on the VAs being adopted in some form?
No, I believe that that is generally true under multiple analyses that were performed for the project.
And so then I guess the question I have for the two of you is both of you is based on the testimony that the two of you have offered, right? There would be reductions in delta outflow at these certain times as described by Ms. Bizzoni, and there could, but may not be increases in delta outflow from the project. Is that correct?
I think in the context of carriage water application, there will be increases in delta outflow from the project.
Anything besides carriage water?
There is the possibility that flows after serving their fish food benefit in the YOLO bypass may continue as delta outflow.
Do those flows provide a net increase in delta outflow as compared to having never diverted the water in the first place?
Objection.
No.
Jake.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you meant by those flows.
Can you clarify, Mr. Busher?
Sure. Ms. Bizzoni, you just described flows that go into the YOLO bypass for, I think you described fish food, is that correct?
Yes.
Those flows that you just described, right, do those result in a net increase in delta outflow as compared to having never diverted the water in the first place?
I think in a given month, yes. Over an annual or life of the project, no.
And Ms. Forsyth, do you disagree with Ms. Bizzoni's characterization?
No.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for this panel this time.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. We are at 11:59. Let me look to the room with respect to the coordinating NGO parties. It looks like Mr. Stork, are you planning to ask questions of this panel?
Yes.
And a rough time estimate?
It should be short, no more than 5 or 10 minutes.
Great, thank you. And I will continue to look to the room and scan through. I know Mr. Mooney, it looks like you have questions as well. Do you have a time estimate?
I don't have any questions for the panel, but I just wanted to confirm that any objections to the testimony or motions to strike portions of the testimony with the exhibits as well as the testimony we're reserving towards the end of when they go to submit.
I hadn't thought about motion to strike testimony as in response to cross-exam, but motions to strike or objections to written testimony. Yes, I think the appropriate time, you can raise them now, but I think we'd be better off if you raise them when we consider whether when I consider whether to accept that testimony into the evidentiary record.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have Mr. Stork, and then I know we heard from Mr. Fisher yesterday. You had questions. Is Mr. Fisher on? Do you have questions for this panel?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Based on that, I think what I'd like to do, and I'll look to the witnesses. Are you comfortable if we go for about 10 to 20 more minutes with Mr. Stork, and then we take a break for lunch? And then you will be, we'll still have more, but we'll have gotten through the NGO coordinating parties. Thank you. I appreciate your, I don't know what the word is. Resilience. Fortitude, maybe is the word. Mr. Stork, please go ahead.
First, I'd like to say that I've always found Ms. Forsyth to be quite knowledgeable, regardless of whether or not she's an expert or not. I'd like to just ask some follow-up questions for Ms. Bizzoni on her PowerPoint presentation, pages 21 and 22.
Are you referring to the slides?
The slides, yes.
Okay.
Well, either of you happen to know the exhibit number just to make it easier for Ms. Moran?
259.
Thank you.
Oh.
So this is a summary of your written testimony, and you have essentially found that that the Sacramento River considerations are that the proposed flow to be diverted is from Shasta and Tama counties. I assume that's correct.
That was a conclusion from the EIS that was relied upon for this analysis.
Correct. And that 25.3 thousand acre feet is what the projected M&I demand is, at least for the purposes of your analysis, for these two counties.
Objection. Is there a question?
Is that correct?
There's an estimated combined increase of 57.3 thousand acre feet for M&I and agriculture for these two counties.
Yes. And so then your analysis suggests that your average flow on the next page in the Sacramento River after the proposed sites project diversions would be 462 and 1,172,000. Well, 462 and 1,172,000 acre feet average annual. And I believe that is, and that's correct as well. Is that correct?
Those are the numbers stated on the slide. Are you just
Yes.
asking me to confirm what's stated?
I'm just
Okay.
asking you to confirm it. Yeah. And there's an obvious that the project exceeds potential future demands is your next conclusion. Is that correct?
Can you state that question again? I don't believe I understood.
The average annual range of Sacramento River flows after the site's project diversions exceeds the projected future demands of the counties as per the slides analysis.
Yes, in respect to their estimated increase of, I believe it was 57.3 thousand acre feet. We estimate that considering the analysis performed for the sites project, for water availability, there would be at least 462,000 acre feet on an average annual basis.
Mhm. So your conclusions bullet is there would be water available in the Sacramento River to support the projected future demands in these two counties, even after considering the partial assignment of a 025517.
Yes,
Is
that
that
is correct. Yes.
So is there, is it not true that there would presumably be a range of ways in which these two counties might seek to develop water from the Sacramento River?
I believe so.
And is the authority proposing to make some kind of contractual or arrangement or otherwise with these two counties to make available water from Sites Reservoir?
No, there is physically not a method for water from Sites Reservoir to be delivered to these counties as part of the proposed project.
Is there
I'm sorry,
some?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last. As part of
the proposed project.
Thank you, sorry.
Is the authority proposing that there might be some kind of reservation for county of origins to ensure that they might have a priority of water rights if they were to try and build a project that would require water rights?
Objection vague. Mr. Day.
Sustained. I also, I didn't follow the question. If you could just rephrase it, Mr. Stork.
Traditionally, when there is an assignment of a state filing, there is a reservation of the potential future priority of county of origin projects that may occur after the assignment and the project. Is there, does the authority propose to include in its assignment request a reservation of future priority to these two counties?
The authority has not proposed such a term.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same questions on pages 23 and 24, which follow these with regard to Funk and Stone Corral. These are a little bit easier. It's a question of what the memorandum of understanding is with the storage partner. That inflow collected to sites, your second sub-bullet of your second bullet, sorry, your first sub-bullet of your second bullet is inflow collected to storage from the creeks would first be allocated to Colusa County.
Can, sorry, can we move to the next page, please?
Page
Ms.
24.
Moore?
Yep, page 24, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So the question I have on, it's a clarification question on sub-bullet 1, and that is, it's first allocated to Colusa County. Does that mean that Colusa County would have a priority of water collected as storage from Sites Reservoir if it chose to seek that?
Water flowing in from the creeks that can be collected to storage in Sites Reservoir would first be allocated to Colusa County. So they would have a priority, yes, to any water coming in from those creeks.
Would they have a any sort of county of origin priority beyond the 14.1 thousand acre feet per year average annual? In other words, would they have some priority beyond that is actually collected from those creeks?
They will receive first priority as long as they have available storage space within the reservoir. They will have first priority to any water flowing in from the local watershed, which is the watershed of those two creeks.
So as a storage partner, do they have to purchase that space?
They are participating in the project. Can you restate the question? Because yes, please restate your question.
Be happy to. There's an MOU, your second bullet suggests that there's an MOU with Colusa County, who is a storage partner. And I'm asking the question of the nature of the commitment to Colusa County as a storage partner, or if they are not a storage partner. So the more difficult question is, if they are not a storage partner, is there some proposed reservation under the traditional county of origin procedures to Colusa County, absent being a storage partner?
The memorandum of understanding does not consider them in the context of not being a storage partner because they are currently an active storage partner in the project.
Okay. And if they were to withdraw from being a storage partner because of reasons, then the MOU does not provide them any potential priority over the sites project for water available in these watersheds.
Objection calls for a legal conclusion.
Well, let's see.
That's
First
assured.
of all, Stuart, I don't think you actually asked a question. We didn't get to the question word, I don't think. I'm going to overrule the objection with respect to calling for a legal conclusion with the understand this is Ms. Bizzoni's understanding. To clarify this testimony on the slide. Mr. Stork, will you ask it again, please?
Yes, certainly.
For my benefit.
So if Colusa County, for whatever reason, is not a storage partner, the MOU does not provide them with any other commitments on priority to these watersheds. Is that true?
I'm reviewing.
Sure.
And we understand this is based on your understanding, Ms. Pizzoni.
That's correct.
My understanding is that that has not been discussed, as they are an active storage partner, and at this time, they will have space within the reservoir and have priority to these flows over all other participants in the project. I cannot suggest what may occur if they decided to no longer participate.
Thank you. And if going down to the second bullet, at least from what this says, that Glenn County can be a beneficiary under the MOU. The MOU is, however, with Colusa County. So can you explain that? How Glenn County can be a beneficiary under an MOU with Colusa County? No doubt the MOU makes that clear, but it's unclear to me.
Yes, and maybe we should pull up the agreement or the MOU and let it speak for itself. I definitely
Always a good
I
idea.
don't know if I should interpret it.
That's good. Let's do that. Do we have an exhibit number?
Um,
I don't have
yes.
it right offhand.
Just give me a second. I need to, it's in AHO 314.
And I enjoy having a professional engineer read MOUs.
And I believe,
And
looks
it
like
would
paragraph
be
10.
about page, I'll take a shot. Let's go with PDF page like 40. Probably 3 pages down. One more. No, 2 more, sorry. We're getting closer though. At the top, it says memorandum of understanding. So let me see what page we're on. Oh, there's more pages here than I thought. Can you go to the very bottom of the page, please? There we go. 28. We need 5 more pages from here. My count was not good of how many we had at the beginning. There we are. On the 3rd page, paragraphs 10 and 11. So I think the second sentence here in paragraph 10 is the most informative, that says the county, referring to Colusa County, agrees to enter into any necessary agreements with Glenn County and will make the county's storage allocation available for storing any agreed upon portion of Funks Creek and Stone Crow Creek water for Glenn County's use. So it would be up to Colusa County and Glenn County to come to an arrangement, which is why we say that they are a potential beneficiary of this MOU.
So just making sure that I understand, Glenn County's potential benefits under this MOU are contingent on them coming from Colusa County's participation in this MOU and commitments that the authority is making to Colusa County. Is that correct? Do you and I read that the same?
It is through the commitments and understanding of Colusa County and the Sites Project Authority as agreed to in terms 10 and 11 of this agreement.
Okay, thank you. See, that didn't take long. Wasn't hard.
Is that all of your questions, Mr. Stork?
Oh, there'll be more in the future, but
Well,
no.
I meant for this panel.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. It is 12:21. Let's give us a full hour for lunch. I think that's appropriate and we need it. Where we will pick up when we come back, I believe we have completed questions from the coordinating NGO parties, and I will look, I believe, to you, Mr. Reese, if you have questions, and we will proceed from there. So we'll go from Mr. Reese to Mr. King and Mr. Ornbaum. Are there any questions before we break for lunch?
Can I just provide a clarification for the transcript? There was a request if we wanted an index of exhibits at the beginning of the transcript, and I've confirmed that it's not necessary.
Thank you. All right, with that, let's return at 1:22. And if you would please log out of the Zoom or expect to have to log back into the Zoom when we return. Thank you. See you after.